In the heat-soaked lands of 1885 Texas, where the desert winds whispered secrets through mesquite trees and frontier life was as raw as the land itself, a peculiar family took root, one that would come to define a chilling chapter in local folklore. The seven brothers, known only by their shared surname and cryptic nicknames passed down through hushed conversations, emerged from the outskirts of a town that officially refused to acknowledge their presence. What made their origins so strange wasn't just their behavior or physical oddities. It was the complete absence of any verifiable birth records, church logs, or formal registrations. In a time when most communities relied on tight-knit religious congregations and handwritten county books to chronicle each birth, baptism, and burial, the brothers' names appeared nowhere. Locals claimed the family came from the east, possibly Louisiana or Mississippi, but no neighboring towns reported a family matching their descriptions. The land they settled on was equally peculiar. A stretch of rocky terrain deemed inhospitable and avoided by nearby settlers for its strange mineral deposits and an almost magnetic pull on compasses. Yet, the brothers built a crude but sizable homestead overnight. Some said it appeared in less than a week, without hiring laborers or using town supplies. Witnesses swore the land seemed to change once they arrived. Livestock avoided it, insects vanished from it, and the soil, once dry and brittle, turned dark and wet as if soaked from below. The family structure itself defied local norms. There were no known parents, no elders, no documents to suggest any guardianship or origin. The oldest brother, who townsfolk later nicknamed Shepherd, spoke rarely but displayed authority over the others. He communicated not with harshness, but with a chilling calm that felt rehearsed, almost preternatural. The other six followed his every instruction without hesitation, often completing tasks simultaneously or appearing to anticipate one another's actions. Several residents reported seeing them in perfect formation during trips into town. 7 men walking in sync, wearing identical expressions, never speaking unless prompted. Physically, they were unmistakable. Pale skin that refused to tan under the blazing Texas sun, eyes that shifted in hue depending on the time of day, and hair that seemed unnaturally thick and wiry. Some believed they were albinos, though their eye color defied the typical red or blue hues found in albinism. Medical practitioners, including a traveling physician who examined one of the brothers after a minor accident, noted an unusually slow pulse and cold skin temperature that did not fluctuate even in high heat. But what disturbed the doctor most, and what he later recorded in his private journal, was the absence of certain biological markers. No visible veins, no response to pain when given pressure, and a lack of natural body odor, which he described as an absence of presence. No midwives or doctors recalled delivering such children, and no women in town were ever known to be associated with the family. This led to increasing speculation. Some believed the brothers were part of a failed scientific experiment from the Reconstruction era, a theory tied to the remnants of Union medical outposts that once dotted parts of Texas. Others were convinced the family was tied to mysticism or a forgotten sect that had fled persecution. But none of these explanations stuck, because no one could trace them back to anything or anyone. Every paper trail, every eyewitness account prior to 1885, collapsed into rumor or dead ends. Religious leaders were baffled. Priests and ministers who visited the homestead on invitation. Yes, some were invited, returned changed, speaking in broken sentences, their faith shaken. One Methodist preacher left town altogether, abandoning his flock without warning. Another, a fire and brimstone Baptist, claimed the land spoke to him and called the brothers echoes from a place man should not look into. He was later institutionalized in a state hospital after attempting to remove his own eyes during a sermon. The townspeople eventually developed an unspoken agreement. Don't ask questions, don't go near their land, and don't invite the brothers into your home. The schoolhouse didn't record them as students, nor were they ever seen at social gatherings, holiday events, or even funerals. They existed like shadows at the edge of a lantern's glow, always seen from the corner of the eye, always leaving a chill behind. The only documented contact with county authorities came when a land surveyor tried to map the property boundaries. He returned days later, pale and confused, unable to draw a single line on his map. He claimed his compass spun violently near the property's edge, and his measurements disappeared from his notebook overnight. Their existence challenged the very mechanisms through which society understood identity, lineage, and history. Without records, without parents, without origin, they were a mystery sealed not just in silence, but in rejection. Science, already limited in 1885, couldn't handle the inexplicable. And so, the brothers remained untouched by it, carefully avoided, conveniently forgotten, and left outside the pages of conventional truth. In the dry autumn of 1885, the 7 brothers vanished. Not one by one, not gradually, but all at once. A town that had already tiptoed around their existence found itself forced into uneasy conversation when, one morning, the homestead stood silent. No smoke from the chimney, no synchronized footfalls along the dusty trail into town, no glimpses of pale figures among the hills. It was as if the land itself had swallowed them whole. The disappearance was never officially reported. Lawmen were not dispatched. No posters were printed. Yet every resident knew they were gone, and no one could explain why. The timing, as some quietly noted, was unnatural. There had been no storm, no disease, no conflict. They simply ceased to appear. The eerie stillness of the property unnerved those who lived nearby. Coyotes that once howled from distant ridges began to circle the land's borders but refused to cross. Night after night, strange lights danced above the hills. A pale bluish flicker, like lanterns swaying in a windless void. Horses tied near the homestead refused to move forward, eyes wide and wild. Dogs whimpered and pulled at their leads, tails tucked tight. Whatever had caused the disappearance left a mark, not through destruction, but through silence that suffocated curiosity. And then, just as suddenly as they had vanished, the brothers returned. 12 days passed, no more, no less. At dawn on the 13th day, townsfolk saw them again. Dressed the same, walking the same synchronized steps, no signs of injury or distress. Yet something had changed. Their eyes no longer shifted colors. They now reflected the environment, like silver mirrors. Their gait was slightly off, mechanical in rhythm, as though muscle memory had replaced human instinct. One witness, an old widow named Agnes Farrell who lived within view of the trail, swore they moved as though suspended by unseen strings. She claimed they floated more than they walked, their feet making no impression on the dirt. The town did not rejoice, nor did it mourn. It simply returned to ignoring them, though now with a deeper sense of dread. Questions whispered behind closed doors grew louder. Where had they gone? Why had they returned unchanged by time or weather? And most disturbingly, did they ever truly leave? Some argued that the brothers who returned were not the same. That subtle differences, a slight alteration in their facial symmetry, an unnatural smoothness to their skin, or the absence of familiar gestures, hinted at replacement rather than return. Children, more sensitive to the unseen, refused to look them in the eyes. Some cried at the sight of them, even from a distance. One child, barely 4, pointed at one of the brothers and screamed, "That's not a man!" before falling into a fit of uncontrollable shaking. She was mute for weeks afterward. Town records show an uptick in illnesses, especially among the elderly, during the weeks following the brothers' reappearance. Migraines, hallucinations, sleepwalking. Doctors offered no explanations. Not far from the property line, where prairie grass once grew in tall, golden waves, the ground became thin and cracked, always damp yet never flooded. A permanent mist hovered there, never crossing into town but always visible on clear days. Birds no longer nested in the trees along the border. A few who wandered too close were found days later, their bodies dried and stiff, as if mummified without cause. Travelers unfamiliar with the area who attempted to pass through the land reported strange occurrences. Hearing voices in their heads, seeing flickers of movement where no one stood, and losing hours of time they couldn't explain. The brothers themselves never spoke of where they had been. When pressed, they offered empty smiles or answered with complete irrelevance. A town merchant once asked one of them, "You all right, son?" "Been some time," only to receive the reply, "The water beneath remembers the fire above." None of the brothers had ever been known to speak in metaphor or riddle before. These cryptic phrases became common in the weeks after their return. Some townsfolk believed they were messages, warnings, or even codes. A few tried to record the things they said, attempting to analyze the patterns. None succeeded. The sentences never repeated, and when read back later, they made no logical sense. Rumors spread that the land itself had taken them, that they had crossed into some other realm, and that what returned was not meant for this world. Some speculated about a thin place, a point where the fabric between realities was weak, easily torn. The exact day of their disappearance became a marker in local folklore, known as the Hollow Sundown. Farmers began avoiding the land entirely. A few moved away. Others chose not to speak of it again. The 7 brothers were not merely peculiar in behavior or silence. Their very bodies challenged natural law. From the moment they arrived in the small Texas town, witnesses noted unsettling details that lingered in the memory like the scent of something long decayed. Their features, though symmetrical and striking, seemed artificial, too smooth, too refined. Skin so pale it bordered on translucent, almost reflective in the sun. Veins were barely visible, if at all, and their complexion never changed regardless of the weather or temperature. On the hottest days, when others sweated through their clothes, the brothers remained completely dry. Their clothing, too, was always immaculate, no matter the work they were seen doing. Dirt never seemed to cling to them. Their eyes were the most remarked upon trait. Initially described as green, then blue, then gray, townspeople realized the color of their eyes seemed to change depending on the environment. Dull in the shade, vibrant under lantern light, almost glowing during thunderstorms. Children said their eyes followed you even when they blinked. One boy, no older than 7, swore he saw numbers floating inside one brother's pupils. Another child described the eyes as windows that looked into somewhere you're not supposed to see. The brothers never showed signs of illness. While the town faced outbreaks of flu, yellow fever, and even smallpox across the years, not one of the 7 ever coughed, sneezed, or displayed fatigue. They ate, but never in public. When invited to town meals or church picnics, they declined politely but firmly. One resident, a skeptical schoolteacher named Clark Eaton, followed them after sundown to see if they shared supper among themselves. He later claimed that though he watched for over an hour from the ridge above their property, he never saw a single brother eat or drink. What disturbed him more was that they simply sat, motionless, around an empty table, staring ahead, not speaking, not blinking. Their strength was another point of unease. Though slender, they performed tasks that required intense physical exertion with eerie ease. They moved large stones and logs alone, lifted heavy supplies without straining, and were seen carrying livestock, not dragging but carrying, across their land when fences broke. A blacksmith who watched one of them lift a broken anvil claimed the brother did it with one hand and no visible effort. When the blacksmith later inspected the anvil, he found the handle had fused slightly to the brother's skin, as though it had melted for a moment. The brother did not react to pain, nor did his skin show burns or injury. There were also numerous accounts of their inhuman coordination. The 7 often moved in synchronized gestures, like reflections in a mirror. When one turned his head, the others followed within a heartbeat. When they walked together, their footsteps landed in the same rhythm. Some claimed they never made sound while walking, even on gravel or broken ground. A former Confederate scout passing through described the brothers' movement as drills perfected beyond soldiering, like bones dancing under orders. Unusual vocal traits were occasionally observed as well. They rarely spoke, but when they did, their voices carried a quality no one could describe precisely. Not quite an accent, not quite an echo. Some said it sounded doubled, like 2 voices speaking at once. Others swore it had a metallic undertone, like a bell struck underwater. They never raised their voices, even when angry or startled. No matter the distance or noise level, anyone listening could always hear them clearly, as if the words were not spoken aloud but planted directly into the ear. Physical injuries, on the rare occasion they occurred, only deepened the mystery. A town doctor, called after one brother took a hard fall from a horse, described the incident in a now-missing journal entry that was quoted decades later by his apprentice. He claimed the brother's leg was bent backward unnaturally, but as he prepared to set the brake, the leg began to correct itself. He watched the bone shift under the skin, muscle reknit in real time, and bruises fade away within minutes. When he touched the limb afterward, it was cold. Not like flesh, but like river stone left in moonlight. Most unsettling of all were the night sightings. Several residents swore they saw one or more of the brothers standing perfectly still in their yards or fields in the dead of night, sometimes for hours. No footsteps led to where they stood. No torches lit their way. When confronted or approached, they vanished without movement. No sound, no blur, just gone. A farmer who attempted to fire a warning shot at one of them claimed his rifle jammed and the bullet dissolved in the chamber. He moved out of the area within the week. Despite all these reports, no formal study was ever conducted. Scientists, when contacted by local academics, either ignored the letters or later dismissed the subject after visiting. A professor from Austin, who spent a single night near their land, returned pale and visibly shaken. He refused to speak on record about what he saw but burned all the notes from his trip and resigned his position within a month. In towns where everyone knows each other's names and secrets pass through generations like heirlooms, silence is not natural. It is built. The town near the Seven Brothers understood this in its bones. From the earliest days of their appearance, a quiet pact formed among its people. Speak not of what you see, question nothing about what you feel, and never, under any circumstances, ask the brothers anything. No meeting was held to declare this. No paper carried the rule. It simply settled over the people like dust, clinging to their tongues and clouding their memories. The town's children learned quickly what adults would not say aloud. They were taught which roads to avoid, which trails led too close to the brothers' land, and which hours of the day one should stay indoors, especially during the late dusk when the sky turned violet. It wasn't fear in the conventional sense. It was something more primal, an instinct to survive by pretending the abnormal was never there. Parents did not comfort their children after strange sightings. Instead, they diverted their attention, handed them chores, kept them from wandering. Schools never discussed the family, and though every child in town saw the brothers at least once, none dared speak of them openly, not even in whispers. Stories that slipped through cracks. Odd tales of how time shifted when near their property, or how echoes carried conversations that were never spoken, were labeled imagination. Those who persisted in talking about it were gently shunned. The town had a way of preserving its peace through collective denial. Over time, this denial became culture. Newcomers who asked too many questions found themselves subtly excluded. They would receive fewer invitations, be passed over for work, or find their goods untouched at market stalls. No one told them why. It was simply understood that talking about the Seven Brothers was dangerous, not because the brothers might hear, but because the town might remember. Church sermons stopped just short of acknowledging the family, though references were often made to false angels, or men shaped in man's form but not of his blood. During such sermons, eyes would glance toward the back of the congregation to check if any of the brothers had entered. They never did. Still, preachers chose their words carefully. Some believed even naming the brothers might summon their attention. A local reverend once spoke their surname aloud during a service. He lost his voice the next day and never spoke again. Whether this was coincidence or curse, no one questioned it aloud. Property lines near the brothers' homestead were never challenged, no matter how many feet of land might be in dispute. Surveyors who approached the area often returned without maps, citing unmeasurable terrain or shifting markers. In truth, they had no way of recording what they saw. Some described experiencing disorientation, as if the trees moved when they weren't looking, or that the horizon curved unnaturally. None returned twice. One even claimed his compass spun in slow, deliberate circles and that the ground beneath him hummed like an old machine. After that visit, he stopped working altogether and was later committed to an asylum in Austin. Written records tell even less. Town ledgers, census lists, and tax documents all skip over the property. Not one of the brothers is listed as a citizen, landowner, or laborer. Yet everyone knew where they lived. Their house appeared on no maps, but children could draw it from memory. An old structure with walls too straight and windows that never reflected light. The few who tried to sketch the place found their drawings blurred by morning, the details slipping from their minds like a dream they weren't meant to remember. Some even burned their sketches in fear, claiming that once the image was on paper, they felt watched by it. The silence extended beyond the town itself. When letters were sent to nearby cities asking for medical or academic inquiries, they were returned unopened or with polite refusals. A university in Galveston agreed to send an anthropologist, but the man never arrived. His body was later found outside of town, suitcase unopened, eyes wide, mouth agape. The coroner called it a heart attack. Locals called it a warning. As generations passed, the silence solidified. Children who had once seen the brothers now grew old and pretended they hadn't. Those who had questions buried them with their dead. The town changed. Buildings came and went. Roads were paved. But the area around the brothers' homestead remained untouched. Trees grew taller but never crossed onto their land. Nature itself seemed complicit in the agreement. Visitors sensed it, even if they didn't know why. They would speak more quietly when passing through. They would avoid eye contact with the locals when asking for directions. Some said the air felt heavier near the town's edge, like a thick curtain draped over an open door. The kind of silence that doesn't just hide something, but keeps it alive. When the townspeople first attempted to raise scientific attention toward the brothers, their efforts were met with polite rejection, deflection, and, eventually, a kind of institutional silence. At first, it seemed like oversight. Texas in the 1880s was remote, rugged, and often ignored by formal institutions. But as more letters were sent, more requests made, and more strange events recorded, the pattern became undeniable. The brothers weren't just ignored by science, they were avoided. Experts who were invited never arrived. Those who did come left quickly and said little. And the few who dared to investigate further either disappeared into obscurity or erased all evidence of their involvement. The first notable case involved a naturalist named Elijah Renton, a young scholar from a small university in San Antonio. Intrigued by rumors of biological anomalies, he made contact with a merchant who had done trade with the brothers and arranged for a visit. Renton was last seen boarding a coach near the edge of the town. Weeks later, his horse and cart were found abandoned near a dry creek, his luggage still intact. His journal, retrieved from the bags, contained detailed field notes that started coherent but grew increasingly erratic. The final entry read, "They are not built from this world's rhythm. They pulse in a time that doesn't match ours." Renton was never found. Following his disappearance, local officials discouraged further contact. County records briefly mention the case before classifying it as a lost traveler incident. The sheriff at the time, a hardened Civil War veteran named Miles Harrow, closed the file and refused all interviews. Years later, in a letter found among his personal belongings, he admitted he'd seen one of the brothers up close and had no words in any earthly tongue for what he witnessed. The letter was unsigned and burned before it could be archived. The brothers' physical anomalies alone should have drawn medical interest. A traveling doctor named Thomas Bell, who treated one brother after a reported injury, noted his findings in a private notebook. He described blood that clotted instantly, skin that resisted incision, and internal rhythms that defied anatomical expectation. He sent a sealed report to the medical board in Austin. The response he received was a simple letter: "Cease further inquiry. Respect boundaries." Weeks later, Bell suffered a nervous collapse and was committed to a sanitarium, where he died under mysterious circumstances. His report was never found. These cases were not isolated. Over the decades, as word of the brothers spread beyond Texas through fragmented oral history and hushed campfire tales, a few bold researchers attempted to validate the claims. A biology professor from Boston wrote an academic proposal to study hereditary abnormalities linked to isolated populations in post-Civil War communities. He arrived in Texas, stopped briefly in a nearby town, and was never heard from again. A private investigator hired by the professor's university traced him to a general store where he purchased food and maps. The storekeeper remembered the man but said he seemed confused and kept saying he'd already been there, though he hadn't. There were even efforts to bring journalists into the fold. A newspaper in Houston once published a brief article titled "The Seven Shadows of Coyote Ridge," detailing strange lights, vanishing livestock, and whispers about the mysterious family that locals would not name. The editor who approved the article was dismissed the following week. The story was pulled from all later editions, and its original copy vanished from the paper's archives. The reporter's byline was removed, and no public record of his career remains. Even modern science has refused to touch the story. In the few instances where researchers have stumbled across the brothers through folklore archives or oral history projects, funding has mysteriously dried up. Academic institutions show no interest. When inquiries are made into the land records or geological surveys of the brothers' homestead area, they return incomplete or entirely blank. The very terrain, it seems, has been removed from official charts. Satellite images, when later developed in the 20th century, were reportedly altered to omit a single square mile of land, always distorted by cloud cover or technical error. Some believe there is a quiet force, whether bureaucratic or supernatural, that works to keep science from probing too closely. Theories have emerged of secret agencies, classified documents, or ancient pacts made to protect knowledge that was never meant for the human mind. Others suggest that the brothers themselves project a kind of cognitive interference, a biological defense mechanism that prevents logic and reason from operating within their proximity. Scholars who dare to discuss them often lose credibility, and their peers discourage further involvement, sometimes with a strange intensity that suggests fear more than skepticism. Whatever the cause, the result has remained the same for generations. The story of the seven brothers exists outside the reach of scientific understanding. Not because there is no evidence, but because those who try to gather it find themselves erased, dismissed, or broken. Even in the present day, the story of the seven brothers has not faded. It has only grown quieter, more distorted, more difficult to trace. Though the original town where they lived has changed names and shifted borders, locals still speak of the ridge that doesn't grow and the house that won't fall. The land remains curiously undeveloped despite being surrounded by highways, farms, and expanding suburban sprawl. Developers who once considered purchasing or surveying the property found themselves met with inexplicable delays, lost paperwork, and, in one case, a fire that consumed every document related to the transaction. No legal owner has ever been confirmed. Title offices list the land as under dispute, a status that has never changed in over a century. The sightings, too, have continued, subtle, infrequent, but chillingly consistent. Hikers and campers who stray too close to the area report strange figures in the distance, always in groups of 7, always motionless, always watching. The figures never approach but are often described as appearing closer with each glance. Photographs taken of the land tend to come out corrupted, with static-like interference or unnatural blurs that no camera technician has been able to explain. A drone flight over the area in 2017 reportedly lost all signal and crashed, only to be recovered with its data wiped clean, save for a single frame showing 7 pale figures standing in a field where no people had been. Residents from nearby towns continue to whisper about those boys who don't age. Gas station attendants, truck drivers, and late-night travelers have shared stories of being passed on rural roads by a line of men walking in perfect rhythm, dressed in dated clothing, unaffected by the weather. One woman recounted driving through a stretch of road flanked by tall grass when her engine died without warning. As she sat in the car, windows fogging, her headlights dimmed and revealed 7 silhouettes just beyond the tree line. When the lights blinked out completely, the figures vanished. Her car restarted moments later on its own. Local law enforcement rarely investigates these reports. When they do, the responding officers either file no report or list the call as unfounded. Several former deputies have since come forward anonymously, describing internal pressure not to mention the brothers in any capacity. One confessed in a podcast interview that his dashboard camera footage once caught a fleeting glimpse of them, and the next day, every file in his patrol car system had been deleted. His supervisor later told him the footage didn't exist and warned him not to pursue it further if he wanted to keep his badge and his mind. Online communities dedicated to unsolved mysteries and paranormal phenomena have attempted to compile a full history of the brothers, but the information rarely holds together. Links break. Forums disappear. Entire threads vanish without warning, leaving only cached fragments and broken image files. Videos posted about the brothers receive strange interference. Audio glitches, visual distortions, or sometimes inexplicable whispering layered beneath the track. Users have reported private messages from untraceable accounts warning them to stop digging or hinting that they've been seen. Among the few consistent pieces of the modern legend is a phenomenon known as the mirror effect. Those who encounter the brothers or believe they have often describe feeling as though they've been duplicated in some way. One man claimed that after witnessing the 7 figures from a distance, he began seeing versions of himself in reflective surfaces that didn't match his movements. He swore his reflection blinked out of sync, smiled when he wasn't smiling, or moved a fraction of a second too late. Over time, he isolated himself entirely and was later found missing, his home abandoned, all mirrors shattered from the inside. More recently, a college research team studying regional folklore compiled interviews from elderly residents who had grown up hearing stories of the brothers. Without prompting, several described dreams that occurred on the same nights, often involving long hallways, flickering lights, and the sensation of being watched by 7 indistinct figures. The dreams were never violent but always left the dreamers with a sense of unease and displacement. None of the subjects had spoken to each other beforehand, and yet their stories aligned with uncanny precision. Some believe the brothers are still alive in some form, unchanged, unaging, and bound to their strange territory by a force no one understands. Others claim they were never truly human to begin with, that what returned after their disappearance in 1885 was something else entirely, wearing the shape of men. A few suggest the brothers are a kind of echo or projection, not tied to physical time, but reappearing across decades as part of some unknown pattern or cycle. Theories range from alien origins to government experiments to ancient folklore that predates recorded history. Yet no explanation fully satisfies, and no proof ever stays in one place long enough to be verified. The closer one gets to the truth, the more it slips away, like mist retreating from the edge of a flame. Those who pursue it too deeply often suffer strange consequences: lost time, fragmented memories, technological malfunctions, or worse. 5.